I need to say this before we get started. Before we talk about Ryan Clark or the Rooney Rule or anything like that, I need to say this first. It's true, the Rooney Rule is really kind of a joke. However, I believe that what's being proposed by Mr. Clark, when you actually look at it, at first, it does make sense. But then you realize, and you realize after looking at it a couple of times and then thinking about it, and you're like, this right here, in a lot of ways, would actually be way worse.
And some of these owners that truly were looking to give the job to the best person. Now, I want to make it clear, I believe we have moved to a point to where organizations will hire the best person they feel for the job. But let's not make coaches who have worked their entire lives for this opportunities be the token interview. I think a better solution is for teams who want to skip.
The facts are the people running sports, participating in sports, all they want to do is win and make money, and they don't care who they do it with. They're not sitting there, well, I don't want to make $1 million unless my coach is white. That ain't it. They'll hire anybody. They'll hire women. They'll hire transgenders. They'll hire anybody as long as it helps them win. I'm done. You go, Steve.
Now, guys, before I talk about this, I want to go ahead and say this before we really dive into this. I'm recording this video. It's Saturday night. I'm sitting back, not really a whole lot to do, just trying to save a little bit of cash, and I'm sitting here and I'm watching AFC divisional round. And I think that the Rooney Rule at this moment in time will be the least of the NFL's worries, especially given everything that happened in that Chiefs game. You guys are seeing some of this right here in the B-roll footage. Now, I don't want to anger one side of the aisle. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you exactly what I think. I think the NFL's got a bigger problem, and that problem is, of course, NFL officiating, even though the Houston Texans did not help themselves out. So, yeah, to the crowd out there that thinks that I'm just going to come out here and crap on the NFL officials, I'm here to tell you guys right now, the Houston Texans did not help themselves out. But, of course, the head coach of that team is also going to be a part of this video as well, because I'm going to spend some time talking about DeMeco Ryans. Not from a fan's perspective, but giving you guys a good example of good NFL coaching, or a guy who got hired because of the merits rather than the color of said skin. And of course, you've also got this 18-game schedule that once again is being thrown out there. I don't want to go too far off track. Now, guys, before we fully dive into this, make sure you guys please cut the notifications on for the video. Please, if you guys can, also hit the like button as well for the algorithm. You guys can also follow me on Facebook. I'll put a post in the description box for you guys. You can also, guys, follow me on X/Twitter, whichever one you guys want to call it. Most of the time I call it Twitter, but every now and again I'll throw out there X. You guys can follow me there as well. Also, something else, too, if you guys can, please comment on the volume. If the volume is not enough, please let me know, taking feedback on the channel, and let us go ahead and get started. So, gang, a little over a week ago, I did a video on the Jerod Mayo firing, and I was saying that race scripters were obviously a little bit quiet, but then I realized that they weren't going to be quiet for long. I even had one guy come in on the follow-up video that I did on the situation involving Antonio Pierce, say that I was taking Nick Wright out of context and said that Nick Wright made it about race. And they said, no, he was not making it about race, but yet he went out of his way to say everybody that was tweeting out DEI hire or anything similar to that was racist, so therefore Nick Wright did in fact bring up race, so therefore Nick Wright was in fact race scripting. But what I had noticed was that everybody was going to be shifting this narrative to, well, Robert Kraft just wanted Mike Vrabel to begin with. Now, guys, I did talk about the Vrabel situation a little bit, and I did say that it was not a guarantee that the Patriots would hire Mike Vrabel. I said I felt that maybe Robert Kraft had somebody else in mind, but I would not be surprised. And lo and behold, the New England Patriots did, in fact, hire Robert Kraft, which is where we're going to be. The New England Patriots did, in fact, hire Mike Vrabel. Robert Kraft hired Mike Vrabel. All right? Just figured I'd go ahead and get that out of the way. A little bit of a blooper you guys can have some fun with in the comment section. But still, the point is this right here. Ryan Clark is back, and Ryan Clark is back with yet another take that, let's just say that while it does sound at first, it really falls apart when you scrutinize it and look into it much, much deeper. But let's go ahead and get to that.
News this week is obviously Mike Vrabel being hired by the New England Patriots. I think it was a hire that many people saw coming, especially Aaron Glenn, the defense coordinator of the Detroit Lions, who turned down an opportunity to interview. And I think this kind of puts a light on the Rooney Rule, which to me, the New England Patriots made a mockery of, to interview Pep Hamilton and Byron Leftwich, two coaches who aren't even in football right now, just to fulfill a quota. right? The Rooney Rule was put in place so some of these minority coaches could get opportunities to get in front of these executives.
Okay, now guys, there's obviously a lot more here, but Clark is actually correct. The Rooney Rule is in fact a joke. I remember when the Rooney Rule first came up, at least as far as my mind is what I'm thinking about, there was a situation at the end of the 2001 NFL season, and I want to say it was the head coach of the Lions. As a matter of fact, I do plan on doing a thorough video on the Rooney Rule and why it is in fact crap, and go through it bit by bit by bit, detail by detail by detail. And what happened was that the Detroit Lions owner wanted to hire Steve Mariucci to be the head coach, and a lot of people were wondering why it was that he was passing up on Denny Green. Denny Green had coached the Minnesota Vikings. He had been successful, but they had never really and truly reached the pinnacle of said success. And it set off a bit of a firestorm, and people were saying that black coaches need to be hired. And here we are today, over 20 years later, talking about it. I'm just saying that right there was the first time that any type of, let's just say, racial narrative involving NFL head coaches had popped up. And, of course, there was also the conversation of no black owners. But right off the bat, there's already a couple of things that don't make any sense. So Aaron Glenn had already said, look, I'm not going to do the interview because I kind of sort of already know what's going to happen here. Or it could have been, maybe Aaron Glenn was thinking about, I don't know, the playoffs. I mean, just simply saying, it's a possibility. And Robert Kraft did, in fact, interview two other guys that are of color. Now, guys, you're probably thinking to yourself that what difference does that make? Well, I think interviewing 2 to 3 guys or having another guy on the schedule is a much, much bigger deal than having one. I remember when my team, the Packers, I remember when we fired Mike McCarthy, the first head coach that we interviewed was Jim Caldwell. Jim Caldwell, by the way, wasn't no slouch of a head coach. He had actually done a pretty good job with the Lions. Not a great job, but a solid job. He got them to the playoffs, and I think 2 of those seasons he got them to the playoffs, and also something else too. He had coached the Colts to a Super Bowl appearance. They lost that Super Bowl, but he still got them to the Super Bowl. It's still very, very much an accomplishment. So it's not like we can come out here and say that Robert Kraft was making a joke of the rule, especially given the fact when you compare it to the Packers interview with Jim Caldwell. He was the only black guy that the team had actually interviewed. We would interview a bunch of other coaches, and then eventually we would fall on Matt LaFleur. So people took to the internet to go ahead and kind of remind him, look, Jerod Mayo was already connected to Belichick, being a player under Belichick, being a coach under Belichick. Vrabel too. He got lit up on the internet like he always does on X, on Twitter. And of course, people eventually chimed in. But it was the second half of what you guys just heard, which was only about 35 seconds. This is about a minute total that you guys are about to hear, that got people raising their eyebrows.
And some of these owners that truly were looking to give the job to the best person. Now, I want to make it clear. I believe we have moved to a point to where organizations will hire the best person they feel for the job. But let's not make coaches who have worked their entire lives for this opportunities be the token interview. I think a better solution is for teams who want to skip the Rooney Rule, like the New England Patriots probably would have because they wanted Mike Vrabel, allow them to hire someone on the lower level that reports directly to the head coach, directly to the offensive coordinator, so they can get some of that tutelage that allows their resumes and their careers to build. But let's stop with the bullcrap interviews just to say we did what the Rooney Rule was supposed to do. When it was implemented initially, I believed it worked. It has now run its course and become something that is a joke to NFL and to NFL coaches, and more importantly, to the people it was supposed to help.
Okay, now I could come over here and rip apart everything he said, but there's one thing that I do want to focus in on, okay? And that's basically what he said about, I'll put it this way here. He basically is saying, or at least the way I took it, was that you should have somebody, 1 or 2 people on staff that are like understudies. That's the way I took it, understudies, that the head coach is going to pour all their knowledge into. And when the head coach loses their job, they step down or they get fired, these 2 people would probably get first crack at the interview. Okay, there are 2 very, very big problems with this. Number one, if you are hired to a coaching staff, I would think that even if your job is, say, defensive quality control, I would think that you would want to be learning under the head coach. You would want to be paying very, very close attention to how the head coach runs the team. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the world of coaching, I would think that it would be very, very beneficial for a coach to be on multiple staffs or have been on multiple staffs over the course of maybe 5 or 6 seasons to kind of get an idea of how different coaches run the ship. You know, good old-fashioned trial and error, compare and contrast, that type of thing there. But the other problem is this here. Why in the world would you want to why in the world would you want to interview a guy from the regime that you just fired? I mean, you're firing that regime for a reason. I mean, obviously the team declined. You know, it could have had a very, very piss poor showing. Could have been bad for the past couple of years, and maybe the owner couldn't. I mean, why would you want to hire somebody who was tutored by the guy you just fired? I mean, typically when you fire a head coach, you're basically signaling out there that I want a brand new regime. I mean, that's really the main problem that we have here. It's one of the main reasons why it is that people are looking at this situation and they're saying that this right here is just absolutely stupid. I mean, I will say this here, that Ryan, at first, it does sound like it makes sense, but still at the same time, common sense would tell you, yeah, I don't want to, interview, or, I mean, I have no intentions of hiring this person, so why in the world would I interview them, especially given the fact that they're coming from the regime that I'm firing? Also, one more thing, too, it's actually worse than a Rooney Rule, because now you're telling owners we have to talk to people that we, quite frankly, interact with on a day-to-day basis, whether we know if they want them to. It's almost like you're insulting the owner in a lot of ways, because you're basically telling the owner that you don't know what you have on staff, even though the results are the results. The proof is in the pudding. I don't want this guy who come from this staff to be the head coach of my team. Maybe somewhere down the road, after he's coached somewhere else, and maybe if he puts together a pretty solid resume, then maybe that's the case. But once again, that's where it comes back into the whole fold of experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all that type of good stuff there. D'Amico Ryans got the job in Houston, I believe, because of the job that he did when it come to how he performed in the postseason against the Packers, especially when it comes to shutting down Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau back at the end of the 2021 season, 2022 NFC divisional game. That game there definitely got him perked up, and eventually he got a job. Mike Tomlin, who, by the way, I wanted to do a video on that situation. Mike Tomlin interviewed very, very well for the position, and in less than 2 years, he got a Super Bowl ring. Now, grant that was Bill Cowher's team for the most part that he took a Super Bowl, that he won a Super Bowl with. By the way, Clark was a part of that team, so he should know this. It's not like Mike Tomlin was some slouch coming in. He just became a slouch afterwards. But then again, at the same time, though, the Steelers did go to another Super Bowl, even though they lost it, and they did have some success. Yeah, for the most part, it was a pretty successful tenure. And contrary to the Rooney Rule, Tomlin interviewed for the job, while in the interview was given an opportunity and made the best of his situation. Caldwell's another guy hired, was successful. He was interviewed by the Colts right after Tony Dungy decided to step down. He was successful. Is what the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, the Rooney Rule is, in fact, a joke, but there are cases where head coaches who are black are actually successful and then get hired by other teams due to the fact that they have been successful at the previous job. But taking in somebody from the staff that you just fired because you want the NFL to reinstate another form of, I'm not going to say DEI, but it definitely looks that way when you think about it. And of course, there's where Ryan Clark was getting at without actually saying DEI. Yeah, that right there just seems to me like it's completely and totally counterproductive. But there is one more thing that needs to be said. So for that right there, obviously, I'm going to go back to the second person who was in the montage, Jason Whitlock, who was commenting on as well, who also brought up a couple of additional points that a lot of people just, I don't know, have to be reminded of, because at the end of the day, it's about winning football games and making money.
Stealing a bit of this idea from me in terms of what I said earlier this week about, like, hey, man, these owners have figured out how to circumvent the Rooney Rule. They never believed in it. It's been a joke. And what he needs to say is that the Rooney Rule has made a mockery of the NFL hiring process. Not that the Pittsburgh Steelers or the New England Patriots or anybody has made a mockery of the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule is not that important. And it comes from a conceit and a belief that Ryan Clark, and many others have. I'm not singling Ryan Clark out, but they have this belief that, hey, the purpose of the NFL is to do something special for black people. And so we got to replace the Rooney Rule with another rule that'll make a mockery of the NFL hiring. The facts are the people running sports, participating in sports, all they want to do is win and make money, and they don't care who they do it with. They're not sitting there, well, I don't want to make $1 million unless my coach is white. That ain't it. They'll hire anybody. They'll hire women. They'll hire transgenders. They'll hire anybody as long as it helps them win. I'm done.
Okay, now, guys, altogether, I edited that segment down to about 1 minute and 20 seconds. I'll link the full 10-minute video in the description box. There's also the 2-minute segment from Steve Kim that I'm going to talk about to close out the video because, as you guys can obviously see, there's more to go in this. Look, the vast majority of coaches in the NFL, head coaches in particular, are white. There's a reason for that. Most of them typically tend to go into the more administrative field, meaning that they go into the coaching field. They go more to the business field. They typically tend to pull coaches from that pool there. It's not like they haven't gotten experience playing the game. I'm sure most of them have, but let me ask you a question. John Harbaugh in his prime would not be in as great a physical condition or be as physically equipped to handle the job of being a safety as, say, someone like, say, maybe Ryan Clark himself, who, by the way, was an NFL safety. What I'm saying is that most white guys go to the more administrative side. They're better suited for that there, and most players of color tend to be better for the actual field itself, the playing field. It's not to say that black people can't coach. Now, I gave you guys a few examples earlier that there are black men that can coach. Another person I mentioned before, without actually mentioning his success, was Tony Dungy. He also won a Super Bowl with the Colts. Took him a while. And honestly, to tell you the truth, Tony Dungy, in a lot of ways, should have 2 Super Bowl rings because the John Gruden Super Bowl that he won in Tampa, that was Tony Dungy's team. There are other specifics, by the way, about certain positions on the field that we could get into as well, that I'm not going to get into for the purposes of video time. But the point is this here. Those of color typically tend to be better for the playing field, where those who are not of color typically tend to be better for the press box and the actual sidelines. But Ryan Clark's entire notion, well, Steve Kim would chime in, and of course he would call this basically the Kamala Harris rule. Now, guys, this segment right here is about 1 minute and 54 seconds. I may try to re-edit it down and make it shorter for the purpose of time when I edit this video later on tonight or tomorrow. But let me just try to get the main meat of it out there for you guys. Like I said, the full video will be in the description box, but let's check this out.
A book from the great Thomas Sowell, Social Justice Fallacies. And one of his underlying messages of this book, and he talked about it a lot, is that when it comes to measures and laws and rules that are placed for the greater good of society, he always talks about how there is a desirability of those type of measures, right? Like we want to help everybody, even the playing field, make it equitable for everybody. But he says the problem is we don't often think about the feasibility of such things. And they have this incredible negative impact over the long term. I just what you say the word meritocracy, right? I don't hear a lot of Asians talking about we need more of our representation in the National Football League. I actually want to see the best athletes. I'm good with my nephew in Atlanta kicking, Koo, whatever his name is, does a good job, right? That's all we need to see. I don't need to see a bunch of Asians playing football. Quite frankly, we're really not good at it. We're more meant to tutor the guys than to play the game.
Exactly. Who the hell is better for the position? Look, guys, let me say this really quick. You don't send a brain surgeon in to do heart surgery more times than not. Even though the brain surgeon possibly could do it, it's not a specialty. I am 5'11". I weigh about 200 pounds. In my prime, when about maybe 10 years ago, I could play sports, not as good as NFL players, but you wouldn't throw me out there on the field ahead of a guy who's like fresh out of college who's entering the NFL draft. It seems to me like those who are, better for the playing field typically tend to be of color, and those who are better for the sidelines and the press box, like I mentioned earlier, typically tend to be not black, And going back to that whole thing about the Kamala Harris rule, well, let's get to that.
But they want meritocracy except in certain situations. So think about this. Let's say you are a head coach that's going to get a job, whatever job he wants. He's a highly regarded one, took a year off, and he already has his crews of assistants, and he has a coordinator on both sides of the ball that are both highly regarded, and he's going to bring in his staff. So with the Kamala Harris rule, those two coordinators whose next step will be eventually get their own job, you're telling me that you're going to tell that particular coach, okay, you're going to have to hire this guy because now he's second in charge, even though there may be no prior existing relationship. Again.
Now, guys, I'm going to end the video with two examples. And you guys obviously heard that. To a certain degree, I agree with Steve Kim. But let me give you two examples. We talked about Jerod Mayo earlier, and there's this bit that came out that Jerod Mayo was apparently on the plane ride home was playing cards with the players. I'm not going to get too much into that, except I'm going to say this right here. Don't ever put yourself in a position where you could take from your players or your men. That's all I'm going to say. But the thing is this right here. Jerod Mayo was an extension of Bill Belichick, a lot like Mike Vrabel, which, by the way, has also got me questioning this whole thing about bringing in Mike Vrabel. But still, he's an extension of Belichick. So is Vrabel. And Ryan Clark was reminded of that in the comment section of his Twitter thread. I probably, and maybe Kraft's more forgiving, probably would not want to hire somebody from something that had failed. But then again, at the same time, though, when Belichick was the head coach of the Patriots, it succeeded. It was just the last couple of years where things began to fully decline. People forget, hey, went to the playoffs with What's-His-Nuts, who, quite frankly, I've already forgotten, and pretty much everybody out there has forgotten over the course of this video. And yes, there is a pun here. That quarterback, of course, being the very, very forgettable Mac Jones. Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me like, Robert Kraft might have thought to himself, yeah, I think it was time for a change. And also something else, too, about Mayo. A part of me thinks that Mayo probably would have gotten a second year, but I think that the card incident probably got Robert Kraft thinking, you know what, Bill Belichick wouldn't have done that. So maybe he's going back to what he knows, which, by the way, was successful, and that right there being Belichick. So that way there could be a possibility. Even though I already said that more than likely you probably don't want to hire somebody from the previous regime that failed, but had the Patriots organization really failed under Belichick the last few years, it seemed more to me like maybe they were in a rebuild. I just figured I'd point that out. But that Kamala Harris rule, I think, is very interesting because Kamala Harris was under the tutelage of Joe Biden. Okay? She was under the tutelage of Joe Biden. She was even given responsibilities, like being the border czar, and she failed. The Biden administration, which will end, thank God, in a couple of days, was a complete total failure, complete total disaster. The guy's disapproval is like 62% right now. He probably would have lost the election regardless of what he may think. Even if he had been the nominee, probably would have been way worse. The point is this right here. The American people gave you an example of why Ryan Clark's theory or plan here is stupid. They basically told you outright, we don't want the tutelage of failure. That is basically what they said. We don't want the underlink of that who failed. Because the underlink of that who failed is probably going to be way worse than said entity that did in fact fail. But you guys tell me what you think in the comment section. I would love to hear what you guys have got to say. Make sure you guys please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, sign off in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.